Black Power. It's the Streets Watching TV. We back with another powerful video. A powerful video. If this is your first time coming into the channel, please mash up the like, share the video, and please, that little button down there, subscribe to the channel. Fam, like I always said before, I've been criticized calling a conspiracy theorist when I elaborate that the killing of TUPAC Shakur was done by the FBI. And why do I say that? Anytime that you have an FBI file and you're being followed by the FBI, 9 times out of 10, the FBI knows who murdered you. And 9 times out of 10, the FBI be the assassin. The murder of TUPAC Shakur was done by some people in high places. I said this before, and people told me the only people that killed TUPAC was Orlando Anderson or Suge Knight. Like I said, TUPAC's death is much larger and much bigger, enormous than Suge Knight and Orlando Anderson. See, you gotta understand, we go back to the infancy of this death row organization that was built by Dr. Dre and Suge Knight for the most part. Then after Dr. Dre left, it was Suge Knight, TUPAC. But the person that had the money, the backing, was a guy in prison named Harry O. Harry O, lawyer, criminal defense lawyer, was a crooked, conniving Neanderthal named David Kenner. David Kenner's plot was to take the whole company. This is a very dynamic, complex situation dealing with TUPAC Shakur because he had so many enemies in the industry and outside the industry. We're talking about cops in general, how TUPAC was set up. Where I'm going with this, people, I was sent a video to watch. A YouTuber, the name of the YouTuber is Insomniac. Insomniac Wide Awake. And someone told me it was related to the killing or assassination of TUPAC. I wasn't going to watch it because there's so misinformed information, a cover-up. Most of these Who Killed TUPAC shows, the one Ice-T host not too long ago, I don't remember if it was CBS or one of the particular channels, I watched it, and I can tell you it was hogwash. It excluded the possibility of the American government assassinating TUPAC. He eliminated the possibility that the police killed TUPAC. But I do say that they always try to make the Nation of Islam a scapegoat. I heard a Nation of Islam member killed TUPAC and BIGGIE. But you know, once we understand the LAPD and the crash unit that they was part of, the LAPD had their own gang within inside the police station. TUPAC didn't have to go to Vegas that night. He wanted to opt out of going to Vegas, even though Mike Tyson was boxing. TUPAC felt something was going to go down that night. That's why he didn't want to go to Vegas. He didn't want to go to Vegas. He didn't want to go to Vegas, and I'm going to tell you why. TUPAC was on probation for a particular case. I don't know if it was something to do with the case he was out on, but he was on probation, and he had got in trouble and violated that probation, so they sentenced him to community service, and he had to perform in Vegas at a cops club called 622. Now 622 is the tattoo that the LAPD corrupt cops had tattooed on their arm. Death Row's legal defense lawyer who got Snoop off. Subsequently, the evidence against Snoop come up missing in the police, out of the police locker room, or wherever they keep evidence, the evidence room. Whatever the ballistics was against Snoop just vanished. The same lawyer, David Kenner, got Tupac out with the stroke of a pen. What kind of power this lawyer got that he couldn't get Suge out of trouble though for violating his parole when he went to Vegas on the night of shooting and killing of Tupac Shakur, and also the attempt on Suge Knight's life? See, we gotta understand, when you look at this video that I'm gonna share with you guys, this video kind of clarified and put the pieces in that I always thought the pieces of the puzzle fit now. I always knew that the FBI murdered Tupac Shakur. Why would Tupac been sentenced to perform community service in Vegas for a cop at a cops club 622, the same gang tattoo that was on these corrupt cops? Further in this video, you'll understand where I'm coming from. The murder of Tupac Shakur was done by people in hierarchy position. It has nothing to do with Suge Knight. Suge Knight was probably grimy, took advantage of Tupac and kept some of Tupac's money that were owed to him by Death Row. But the murder of Tupac Shakur and the attempt on Suge Knight's life was security team. The security team that Suge Knight hired through Reginald Wright, former cop Reginald Wright, David Kenner, and a few corrupt cops and an FBI informant bodyguard that was planted in Death Row in 9-2. These people set Tupac up. Michael Moore was also a bodyguard for Tupac Shakur. He gives a true testimony what he heard over the radio the security team had and assigned to him. Each person that was on Death Row security had a radio. Fam, why would Reggie Wright advise the security team that was guarding Tupac Shakur not to carry a gun that night? Michael Moore refused to give up his gun, so he took Michael Moore off the assignment of guarding Tupac, protecting Tupac. Fam, leave comments below and tell me what you think. Did you think the government of the United States, FBI, helped murder Tupac? Streets Watching TV.
This is a prepaid call from an inmate in the men's central jail.
So what happened is this. The Reds knew was all involved. They were trying to kill me too.
During a 2020 prison interview, Suge Knight, for the very first time in history, commented on who he believes was behind the hit on Tupac. Himself being in the car right next to Tupac while the shooting happened, he may have been able to identify the shooter. He claimed the #1 suspect, being Orlando Anderson, wasn't actually the shooter. He went on to name some corrupt cops who he believes were linked to his head of security, which may have been behind the hit on Tupac. For this video, we will take a look into the claims made by Suge Knight during his 2020 prison interview. Death Row Records was formed in the early 1990s. It was brought into existence by Suge Knight, Michael Harry O. Harris, and David Kenner. Suge Knight at the time had been bodyguarding Dr. Dre, while Dr. Dre was a member of the rap group NWA. During this time, Dr. Dre was signed to Eazy-E's record label Ruthless Records. After having a disagreement over contracts, Suge Knight managed to get Dr. Dre out of his record deal over at Ruthless Records. Suge Knight and Dr. Dre then agreed to start a record label. Michael Harry O. Harris was an American drug dealer who was serving a life sentence for murder. His cellmate was Freeway Rick Ross. Freeway Rick Ross was a drug kingpin in Los Angeles who was involved in the Iran-Contra affair. Harry O from behind bars was working on his wife Lydia's album. Freeway Rick Ross, being his cellmate, had advised him to get Dr. Dre to produce the track. Suge Knight then visited Harry O in prison, where a $1.5 million deal was made for the start-up of Death Row Records. The name came about due to Harry O's situation in prison. For the deal being made, Suge Knight would have to take on Harry O's criminal defense attorney David Kenner, who had become the attorney for the artists of Death Row. David Kenner then wrote up business contracts which created Death Row Records, being a parent company of Godfather Entertainment, which was owned by Harry O. Author John Potash claims David Kenner had a stake in ownership of Death Row Records from the contracts which were written up. Following the start of Death Row Records, Suge Knight now had to look for security and distribution. Suge Knight, being from Compton, hired others from there to supply security. He firstly had gang members from the Blood Pyru Street gang in Compton supplying security for him and the artists. In 1992, after getting a distribution deal with Interscope Records, owner of Interscope Jimmy Iovine told Suge Knight that he had to hire police officers for security.
I insisted that they get real security. Real cops.
Suge Knight then gave former Compton cop Reggie Wright Jr. $300,000 to start Right Way's Protective Services. This protection service began supplying security for Death Row Records. Reggie Wright Jr. was a former Compton cop whose father, Reggie Wright Sr., was the head of Compton's gang division. Reggie Wright Jr., while being interviewed for the 2017 TV documentary Who Shot Biggie and Tupac, admitted he had upward of 25 active police officers providing security under Right Way's Protective Services. LA detective Russell Paul claimed some of these officers were involved in the Rampart scandal. The Rampart scandal was a case of widespread police corruption within the Los Angeles Police Department's Rampart Division. The Rampart Division was a police unit who patrolled the Rampart area west of downtown Los Angeles. The division had a unit known as CRASH, which stood for the Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums. A member of this unit was a police officer by the name of Kevin Gaines. He was found out to have been dating Suge Knight's ex-wife, Sharifa Knight, who acted as a manager to Death Row artists. Snoop Dogg, who was signed to Death Row Records, was being managed by Sharifa Knight and had Kevin Gaines supplying his security. Snoop Dogg was involved in the murder of Philip Walter Merriam in 1993. He was acquitted in 1996 after key evidence went missing from the LAPD evidence locker. It's been speculated by authors such as Michael Douglas Carlin that dirty cops may have stolen the evidence, allowing Snoop Dogg to get away with the murder. A police report by LA Detective Russell Poole claimed police from the Rampart Division were working security for Right Ways Protective Services, working for upward of $25 per hour. Russell Poole claimed some of these cops were Kevin Gaines, Rafael Perez, and David Mack. Some of these officers were later revealed to have been implicated in the Rampart corruption scandal. Being one of the worst cases of police corruption in United States history, the LAPD officers handed out playing cards to each other, being as trophies for shooting suspects and civilians. A red playing card symbolized the wounding, while a black playing card symbolized the killing. The cops incorporated these playing cards into their logo and had it tattooed on themselves to show that they were part of the club. This playing card logo will stand out in the further information down the line in this video. Reggie Wright Jr. has adamantly denied that none of these cops ever worked for him.
Why does everyone keep telling me that David Mack was working for you?
I never heard that.
You've never heard that?
That he worked for me?
You've never heard that?
Wait a minute.
Suge Knight, during a prison interview, went on record claiming he himself didn't know any of the police officers, and it was Reggie Wright Jr. who knew them.
I never had a conversation with those dudes. Never met those dudes. They never worked for me. They knew Reggie Wright. They didn't know me.
Other than the cops working for Right Ways Protective Services, there were also several bodyguards who were former law enforcement along with standard security guards. Some of the bodyguards included Kenneth Archer, Frank Alexander, Michael Moore, and Kevin Hackey. Kevin Hackey was a former Compton police officer who was once the police partner of Reggie Wright Jr. In 1992, Kevin Hackey was recruited by the FBI to work undercover to go and infiltrate Death Row Records, posing as a bodyguard. From this, by the police reports filed by Russell Poole, we come to learn that Death Row Records allegedly had corrupt police officers working under Right Ways Protective Services who were supplying security for Death Row.
So, next time I go, there's real police. I found out they were Rampart guys.
As we saw from the prison interview, Suge Knight later went on to claim it was these police officers who were involved in the murder plot of Tupac Shakur.
Perez knew was all involved. They were trying to kill me too, but see, because Perez and Reggie was good friends, and Perez and Sharita and Reg is great friends, and so all those three together was trying to plot.
In 1995, Tupac Shakur was serving prison time in Clinton Correctional Facility after being set up by FBI informant Haitian Jack. Being considered as a riot risk, Tupac was placed in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. Suge Knight, along with Reggie Wright Jr. and David Kenner, started to visit Tupac in prison. Tupac agreed for a 3-album deal. David Kenner would work on an appeal to get him released from prison. Tupac signed a deal, and being released from prison and joining Death Row Records, several of the bodyguards were assigned to him. These included Kenneth Archer, Frank Alexander, Michael Moore, and the undercover FBI agent Kevin Hackey. Tupac released a double album under Death Row Records called All Eyes on Me. Tupac began looking into how much money he was owed from Death Row Records after releasing All Eyes on Me. The album sold 600,000 copies in its first week and eventually went on to sell over 5 million copies. Tupac was looking to start an audit on Death Row Records to get the money which was owed to him. Tupac was being charged with $2,700 in child support, paid for a different Death Row artist. He was also being charged for $100,000 for jewelry purchased by Death Row. Death Row were directly charging Tupac with expenses which were not related to him. Except for paying him the money he was owed from the album, Suge Knight was giving him a guarantee of $10,000 every weekend, being $40,000 a month, even though he was owed millions. The jewelry and flashy cars he bragged about were being provided as gifts from Death Row Records, which were being charged back to Tupac. These were being provided by a leasing company which Suge Knight owned. Therefore, he could take the gifts away from the artists anytime he felt. Tupac fell into debt of $5 million from death row, withholding the money it owed him. Tupac had generated over $60 million in revenue for the release of All Eyes on Me. Tupac started an audit on Death Row Records, which according to author John Potash, had part ownership by criminal defense attorney David Kenner through Harry O's parent company Godfather Entertainment. Chris Blatchford for Fox 11 News, after Tupac's death, reported that a confidential informant had told him, in the summer of 1996, allegedly David Kenner and Reggie Wright Jr. attended a gang summit in Balboa Park, Los Angeles, where Reggie Wright Jr. attempted to find people to be involved in murdering Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight. The alleged motive was to reap the rewards of a company takeover with no audit, with the additional catalogue of unreleased songs by Tupac, which would increase tenfold in sales after his passing. A supposed plan then allegedly went into action. On July 4th, 1996, Tupac and his group, the Outlaws, were performing at the House of Blues in Los Angeles. Outlaws member Hussein Fatal was detained for the possession of a .40 caliber Glock handgun while he was entering the House of Blues. The gun was confiscated by an off-duty Santa Monica police officer. Former head of security for Suge Knight's Gang Supplied Security, a man by the name of Mob James, claimed once Suge Knight hired police security, the police were used against the gang members and the artists to keep them in line. Later on in the month, Reggie Wright Jr. told his former police partner and undercover FBI agent Kevin Hackey to keep tabs on the gun. Kevin Hackey claimed during an interview that the weapon had ballistics tests carried out on it and was run through the crime database. Hackey claimed the results revealed it was not connected to any crimes at that point in time. In the following month of August 1996, the Santa Monica Police Department contacted Kevin Hackey and told him the gun was cleared for pickup. He retrieved the gun and took it to his superiors at the FBI and ATF. They then cleared him to give the gun to Reggie Wright Jr. Kevin Hackey later claimed this gun was implicated in Tupac Shakur's murder. Tupac Shakur, along with the head of his record label Suge Knight, travelled to Las Vegas on September 7th, 1996. All of Tupac's bodyguards claimed that Tupac didn't want to travel to Las Vegas, where he ended up being murdered.
He didn't want to go to Vegas. He did not want to go to Vegas. Matter of fact, he fought off going to Vegas all the way to the last second.
He instead wanted to travel to Atlanta to deal with a family issue, which was confirmed by his cousin Kendrick Lassagne, as he was the reason why Tupac wanted to travel to Atlanta instead of Las Vegas. This was made impossible as information has been revealed that Tupac was forced into going to Las Vegas by lawyers. Authors John Potash and Michael Douglas Carlin claimed this was for community service after police officers charged him with possession. Reggie Wright Jr. claimed it was for community service due to legal trouble Tupac had with the Hughes brothers. It has not been confirmed if David Kenner was behind this, but he was Tupac's lawyer at the time in question. 3 weeks before going to Las Vegas, Tupac was sentenced to community service, which outlined Tupac, to avoid jail time, would have to perform a benefit gig for a police officer at Club 662 in Las Vegas. The nightclub's attorney was a man by the name of George Kalisis. He set up the benefit gig for a Metro police officer, which Tupac was obliged and forced into performing at as part of his community service. If we take a look at the Club 662 logo, it looks eerily similar to the Rampart logo of the Corrupt Cops. Kevin Gaines, being one of the corrupt cops under the Rampart division, was listed as being on a special assignment in Las Vegas during the time Tupac was murdered. Undercover FBI agent Kevin Hackey, who was bodyguarding Tupac, admitted he was told by the FBI that the wiretaps that they had on Death Row Records was revealing that something big was going to take place in Las Vegas. The FBI, due to this, removed Hackey from his duties, not allowing him to bodyguard Tupac. Communication between Tupac's security was stripped down by doing this. Just prior to the trip, Kevin Hackey had taken the radio off of bodyguard Frank Alexander, which was being used for security. With the FBI removing Hackey from the situation, there was no way of the radio being returned. Therefore, the communication system used by security was hindered by the FBI on the night Tupac was murdered.
Kevin Hackey had my Nextel two-way cell phone radio that should have been given to me when I arrived in Vegas.
It's huge. You know, one of the things you'll see throughout history, and even in a military assassination, is the fact that let's take out communication.
While in Vegas, the remaining security, including Frank Alexander and Michael Moore, met with Reggie Wright Jr. at the home of the attorney for Club 662, George Kalisis. While there, Reggie Wright Jr. and George Kalisis told the security team not to carry their weapons while guarding Tupac Shakur, and was told to leave their weapons behind. Michael Moore refused to give up his weapon, so Reggie Wright Jr. removed him from Tupac and was told to stay with Reggie at Club 662. Suge Knight and Tupac watched a Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand Hotel. While leaving and in the lobby, Suge Knight's associate Trayvon Lane, who is a Blood gang member, pointed out Crip gang member Orlando Anderson. Tupac then ran over and attacked Orlando Anderson along with the death row entourage. Tupac then went back to his hotel room and changed clothes. Him and some members of his group, the Outlaws, along with his bodyguard Frank Alexander, then went to Suge Knight's house in Vegas. Suge and Tupac, being followed by the entourage and security, traveled to Club 662 so Tupac could perform as part of his community service. Undercover FBI agent Kevin Hackey had confirmed that behind the entourage, the FBI were tailing them, who had them under surveillance. At 11:15 p.m. while stopped at a red light on East Flamingo Road and Colville Lane, a white four-door late model Cadillac pulled up to the right side of the BMW Tupac and Suge Knight were traveling in. A drive-by occurred and Tupac was hit 4 times while Suge Knight was grazed in the head. Undercover FBI agent Kevin Hackey claimed that the FBI have the shooting on tape. Michael Moore, being the bodyguard who refused to give over his weapon and was at Club 662 with Reggie Wright Jr., claimed over Reggie Wright Jr.'s radio, which the security used, he heard the words, "Got 'em." He then claimed another voice came on the radio and said, "Don't say anything over the radio."
I was working at 662. I heard something over the Nextels that we all carried for security. And what I heard was, "Got 'em." Right before me and Mr. Wright got in the vehicle to go get to the hospital, someone else came on the radio and said, "Hey, don't say nothing over the radio."
Some media outlets have claimed that Michael Moore later stated that the second voice was David Kenner. However, this has never been verified. One of the radios, as stated, was in the possession of the FBI, and the FBI were a few cars behind Tupac surveilling them. Tupac died 6 days later on the 13th of September 1996. Suge Knight, in a 2020 prison interview, claimed there was a conspiracy against him by Reggie Wright Jr. and crooked cops from the Rampart Division, which attempted to murder both himself and Tupac while in Las Vegas. He claimed Orlando Anderson was not the shooter, which leads to the theory which claims Orlando Anderson was used as a scapegoat.
The sad thing about it, Orlando wasn't even the shooter, you know?
When Las Vegas police booked the shell casings and bullets into evidence, they were sent off to the FBI where they were ballistics tested. They were run through the federal database where, according to Kevin Hackey, they matched a gun confiscated at the House of Blues on July 4th, 1996, which was given to Reggie Wright Jr. If we remember, it was the FBI who cleared Kevin Hackey to give this gun to Reggie Wright Jr. This possibly means both the police and the FBI may have been involved in the murder of Tupac. The day after Orlando Anderson was killed on May 30th, 1998, a .40 Glock was found buried in the backyard of a girlfriend's house to a Southside Crip member who was with Orlando Anderson in Las Vegas. The police sent the weapon to the ATF for ballistics testing. Once again, it came back as a positive match of the Glock, which was confiscated at the House of Blues 2 months earlier, being given to Reggie Wright Jr. Reggie Wright Jr. claimed this was a conspiracy theory created by Kevin Hackey. Hackey challenged Reggie Wright Jr. to take a lie detector test, offering upwards of $100,000 for it, but he refused.
Here at the House of Blues in 1996, an off-duty Santa Monica cop working security confiscated a .40 caliber Glock handgun. Hackey says he first showed the handgun to his FBI handlers and then turned it over to Reggie Wright Jr. A month later in Las Vegas, investigators say it was a .40 Glock handgun that killed Tupac Shakur. Hackey believes the murder weapon was the same gun he gave Reggie Wright Jr.
The conspiracy claimed by Suge Knight in a 2020 prison interview claimed there was a plot by Reggie Wright Jr. who used crooked cops and their resources such as police scanners and radios to set up the murder of Tupac Shakur, which allegedly, according to Suge Knight, was a bigger plot to also murder him in an attempt to take over the company. Death Row Records at the time was worth $500 million. Following Tupac's death, Suge Knight was sentenced to 9 years in prison after several probation violations, including the altercation with Orlando Anderson and a conflict of interest with a prosecutor directly orchestrated by David Kenner. David Kenner and Reggie Wright Jr. began to run the $500 million company, profiting off of releasing Tupac's unreleased songs. There is a video on the web of Reggie Wright Jr. affirming that he set up both Tupac and Suge Knight.
This Aretha wanted to take over Death Row. And you set up Suge and Pac. Oh, wow.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to smash the thumbs up button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and press the bell button so you can get all the future notifications for when I upload. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.